Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, one of the programmers here at SF DocFest. We've been screening some of the most interesting, cool, and irreverent documentaries from around the world for the last 23 years. And you're just lucky enough to see this really terrific documentary, our centerpiece film, Art for Everybody. We're lucky enough to have the director, Miranda Youssef, here and producer, Tim Rummel. Nice to meet you guys.
Great to meet
Yeah,
you.
to meet everybody.
Thanks again for being part of the festival. I had read a review of your guys' film at another festival, and it was just such a great review. I was like, I need to see this movie. And luckily enough, that kind of serendipity intervened, and we got a chance to bring it here at SF Doc Fest. I was curious, like, what was the kind of genesis of the idea for the film, and that you guys decided, that this was the story whose rabbit hole you wanted to go down?
Well, I'll just say I've been wanting to produce a movie with the director Miranda for a long, we've been looking for a project to do. And I heard, or we heard really a rumor from some friends in the high-end art world that there's just more to Thomas Kinkade than people realized. And so we started to talk about that and then research his life and realize that there was a really interesting story to tell. And then we reached out to the family and asked them about doing, an honest kind of fully revealing documentary about their father. And they were on board to do that. And not only that, but they revealed that there was a lot more to the story than we even realized.
Oh, wow. And can you talk a little about, there's a lot of discussion in the kind of documentary space about, like, how to work with collaborators and subjects and things. And I imagine that there's lots of things to navigate there, especially when have a family member, but then also just in regards to the brand, I guess. And so, what were some of the ways that you kind of like, um, what was the collaborative relationship like, and how were they involved over the course of the making of the film, so you could remain independent to guys share your guys' creative vision?
Yeah. Well, the family actually had been wanting to tell their own story, like their own version of what actually happened. So I think that first and foremost, like that got us quite a bit of ground. um, I would say that the brand of Thomas Kinkade and the sort of almost legend that he spun about himself cast a really long shadow over the lives and stories of his wife and his children. And, obviously their life was much more complicated and at times painful than, the sort of I don't know, rose-colored picture that was being presented to the world when he was alive. So, that I think was really a major part of it, was that they wanted to tell their story. When we as a team approached them about doing it, we were very clear with them that we wanted to like work with them. Like our other producer in the film, Morgan Neville, said something that really stuck with us, that when making a documentary is like going into therapy together. And like it's this feeling that like we're all going to grow and maybe heal through this process. And we said, like, look, we need to have creative control over this story, because otherwise it won't have credibility. And we are not going to make a puff piece, but we also are really not interested in doing like a hatchet job. That's not interesting to us. It's really, what's interesting is this idea. The way that I put it is that his fans had one two-dimensional view of him, and his haters and critics had a totally different two-dimensional view of him. But we, our creative team, knew that there was like a real three-dimensional human being in there somewhere, and that is what we wanted to find. And so that was, I think, appealing to the family. And then we just were lucky enough that they entrusted us with their stories, and we tried to honor those stories.
Very cool. And what was the kind of the process like? And I know, Miranda, this is kind of your feature film directorial debut, but you've edited a lot of great documentaries over the years. So how do you think your eye as an editor shaped the way that you kind of approached filming, and also just kind of constructing the story?
I mean, on a very practical level, the way that I approach editing is I beat out the story. Like, I think about what's the story about on a plot level, what is it about on a deep human philosophical level, and then I lay out a board. Like, literally, I have a cork board that has colored index cards, and each index card is a scene, and I just like organize it. So before we started shooting, I actually took the research that we had done and sort of tried to sketch out what that was as a path for how to film the with the family, and how to structure the questioning and all that sort of thing. um I would say that the other thing that's really important to me that I kind of just glossed over is that for me, like, films, if they're evergreen, as opposed to just chasing whatever the latest news item might be, they're evergreen when they have something to say about humanity or the human condition or about our society or about life. And so I always, when I'm editing, I'm always looking for what is that thing. And so I approached this film the same way. It's like, what is the life and person, the character of Thomas Kincaid able to tell us about what it's like to be a person? And I thought that his life kind of touched on all of these focal points in American cultural history while he was alive that I thought were really relevant to today. Um, like the culture wars, obviously, and the the cost of turning yourself into a brand, which in our social media age is like a huge thing. All these things that I think still are really very relevant. And so, in a way, that's something for my editing mind that I also brought to, but it's just, I think it's just storytelling. So
Well, yeah, there's some great subtext there in that way, which I guess, you know, it makes me wonder. So, what was your guys' relationship or familiarity with Thomas Kincaid before kind of hearing about this kind of like layer of, stories? I mean, did you guys have your own kind of presumptions or familiarity, or was, um,
Well, I'll just say
um
I grew up in Minneapolis near the Mall of America, and there
oh,
was
wow.
an incredible Thomas Kincaid gallery in the Mall of America. So I was very familiar with it. It was art that was in the homes of many of my friends. It was, yeah, it was a part of our culture for sure.
yeah, and I mean, I was excuse me, growing up in the Northeast, and I was definitely aware, like, he was so present in the 90s, like it was just everywhere. I don't know if I've ever been to the Mall of America Kincaid store. I'm sure it was amazing, but like they were in malls in Massachusetts as well. And so, it was he was just like in the air that everybody was breathing. Um, you know,
Well, and then I guess when as you're as filmmakers, right? And you when you're working on a project that goes over a couple of years, it's like I'm sure lots of people are asking like, "What are you working on?" or like, "Why are you making this film?" Right? And because of so many biases and contradictions associated with like, how did you like? Were there things that surprised you of like you know how people kind of saw him or his art that then kind of affected the way that you kind of shaped the film so that you could make a really wonderful film that I think that like if somebody watches it, I think they'll be just surprised in so many different ways. But yeah, like did how did you kind of how are you going to win over the haters, I guess?
what do you think, Tim?
Well, I mean, I just think I don't know if we went into it right away with this idea, but it very quickly became a conversation about like who gets to decide what good art is, and I think for me personally, reading the fan letters, which I read boxes and boxes of, really opened my eyes, right? That this was art that was meaningful to people, to many, many people. And I think Miranda has a larger philosophy about um kind of humanizing, again, getting to that culture war idea, and like whether or not it's healthy for us to be divided on issues of art. Should we really be facing off against each other that way?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I've always had in terms of filmmaking, whether I'm editing or directing, I've always had this kind of core value that you have to love your subject. That and love in the sense that, like, you know, you have to have compassion for them. And so in a way, like the process of making the film was like finding those moments where you could feel compassion. I mean, and you know, during the process of making it, there were times where I hated him. I was like, how could you do this? You know? And then there were other times where I was like, oh, poor Tom, you know, like I feel bad about this or whatever. So, you know, but I think kind of our teams like kind of grappling with that, and I think that that infuses the film with, you know, something that most people talk to us about, which is the balance in the film. Like, I can't tell you how many times people come up to us after screenings and just say, like, it was so balanced. Like, you essentially, like, you didn't make me feel bad for either loving or loathing Kincaid. Like, you gave me the opportunity to like see and understand the other side of this, um, but not feel like I was being judged, which you know, I think Tim and I agree is really important. Um, and you know, I'll also just add that I think kind of during the research process, like during the development process for the film, I came across a Politico article that was talking about the 1991 book Culture Wars. This was a book by a sociologist named James Davison Hunter. And he popularized that term culture wars. And he said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something to the effect that, like, culture wars don't always lead to shooting wars, but shooting wars always start off as culture wars because culture provides the justification for violence. And I think it's kind of obvious why this would have struck me so deeply as somebody who's concerned with our country and our society. And I feel like, you know, we have to push against the forces of political polarization and of, you know, the social media landscape and all of the things that are pressuring us to dehumanize one another. And we have to rehumanize one another, because I think that that's the only way we can move forward as a society.
Well said, and thank you for sharing it. One of the things that we always, you know, I think there's this kind of stereotype with documentaries sometimes is that, like, you know, a filmmaker either must be like a really big fan of the subject to make it, you know, or they must really loathe it. And it's like, which obviously I think, you know, the best documentaries come from much more complicated places. There was a really great documentary shared last year, the Kenny G film by Penny Lane. I don't know if you got, you know, so this is kind of a nice simpatico, you know, of, you know, you know, with that. Um, you know, over the course of the filming, I mean, there were a lot of kind of hidden surprises that you kind of were made aware of beforehand, but was there anything that kind of like, you know, was a particular surprise or challenge, you know, over the course of the making of the film that you didn't expect?
One surprise that I think we discovered as we made the film was like we loved getting to interview Susan Orlean about her article that she wrote about Kincaid, but what we discovered was how influential that article was in actually kind of making the kind of more the coastal, culturally elite parts of the country kind of aware of this incredibly successful artist. And the fact that, like, when Jeffrey Valance, who's a brilliant artist, told us that show that he put on was directly as a result of the Susan Orlean article. Like, that was we had no idea. Like, that was revealed in the interview. Like, and those moments are so fun when you hear somebody make a connection you didn't have, like, in the middle of an interview.
Yeah, that was really fun. And I think another thing that for me was surprising was like learning how educated Thomas Kincaid was about art history and like the contemporary art world of the time. Like, he really kept up like he subscribed to art publications and he was reading them all the time, and he really knew what was happening in the art world, but the way that he kind of presented him as like, oh shucks, he didn't his public persona didn't reveal just how educated and I guess how thoughtful and educated he was about the whole history of art, and not just the kind of art that he liked, but all kinds of art.
I mean, this one is a little bit of a complicated question, so feel free to punt if you like. What do you think he would have thought about there being, not this film particular, but just even a film being made about him?
I mean, we joked at one point, given that he hid all of this work away and didn't share it with anyone, that we were essentially his last work. Like it was waiting there for someone like us to come along. And so I don't know. I mean, who knows what he would have thought, but boy, it does feel like he left the breadcrumbs there for somebody to discover.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. And also because the recordings, the cassette tapes, he starts them in 1974 when he's 16. I mean, you hear it at the the very beginning of the movie. That's the first cassette tape. And basically, if you listen to those cassette tapes, he's like, this is for art world posterity. Like, this is for the historians of the future. Like, I'm going to tell you my story. So he always had this sense that like he was going to, this hope, I guess, that his story was going to be this big story. Like he wanted to be important in some way. And so I think, Tim, you were the one who came up with that notion that like this is the last part of the whole performance art piece is the documentary.
Well, that's cool. Well, one of the things I always remind our audiences is that, we're so grateful that we get a chance to share films like yours earlier in their life. And, our job is for the films that we like to kind of be your grassroots street team to kind of go out there and help spread the word, whether it be, after drinks, after the screening, or on social media. What's a good place to kind of continue to follow the life of your film and, other work of yours?
Well, Tim, if you want to talk about other work, I'll let you do that.
No, go ahead with the Instagram.
But so we've got the Instagram. Yeah. So I think that the main place is the Instagram account for the film, which is at Art for Everybody Film, all one word, no numerals. At Art for Everybody Film. So the handle is also the same for the Facebook page. Those things get updated, and we have an artforeverybodyfilm.com website as well, but news and updates is really on the Instagram account.
Yeah, so any future festival screenings we'll promote there, and then when it finds a distribution home, we'll put that news there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Everybody go out there and let people know about this really wonderful film, Art for Everybody. And Tim and Miranda, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for watching the film, everybody.
Yes.